There's more to the Books of Clash scenery than meets the eye. You may have already figured out that the scenery is based on the Books of Clash graphic novel, but it's not simply based on the art style. There is so much of the story baked into the scenery, and after reading the sample of the Books of Clash, I have a much better appreciation for the scenery, and I would actually recommend that you read the sample that I've linked in the description. It's definitely worth it. But don't do it now. I'll remind you at the end of the video so that the average view duration of this video doesn't drop like Terry after being launched by a Springtrap. Yeah, that's a reference that you'll only get if you read the preview. In the top right is the camp of the Hog Riders of Triumphica. It'll all make sense if you read the Books of Clash. And according to the comic book, these pink things you see on the benches are dark elixir muffins, which the Hog Riders love to eat. And I actually thought that these Hog Riders over here were just some random Hog Riders, but this guy who makes up the entrance and these two riders on the edge are actually all the captain of the Triumphica Hog Riders, Raucus the Rageful. And a little side note, the Super Hog Rider actually looks very similar to Raucus, and it's kind of funny because the scenery was released over a month before the update where the Super Hog Rider was announced, so we technically could have predicted the design of the Super Hog Rider just by looking at the scenery. The bottom right corner of the scenery is a little village, and this is actually the town of Jazzy Pickleton. Yeah, seriously. If we could see the other side of this banner, it actually says Jazzy Pickles. You can see the goblin camp over on the bottom left, and then the Hog's house up on the top left, along with the deserted Royale scenery, and I can't tell you what significance those have in the book because I haven't read that far. The sample that I read did explain a lot of references in this scenery, but there are probably way more Easter eggs that I'm missing, and a lot of people would probably catch on to if they read the Books of Clash. I found 5 bananas in this scenery. The first one is on this skull sign, the second one is up in this cave, the third one is in this cauldron next to the Hog's house, the fourth one is over here at the Hog Riders camp next to the bench, the fifth one is behind the broken down battle machine over next to the village. That's really the only Easter egg directly related to Clash of Clans. All the other ones in here are probably going to be referring to the Books of Clash. The most important part of a scenery is the design. A lot of people were saying that this design is the Clash-orama scenery, and they're not entirely wrong, but in reality this scenery was completely based on the art style of the Books of Clash graphic novel, and I am a big fan of this style. It's different from all the other sceneries that we've gotten, and I really like that. But despite being simple, there is a lot of attention to detail. All these campfires are very well animated, but they still blend in with the 2D design. There's also sparks flying off of all the fire, as well as sparks and bubbles coming out of the volcano. There's ripples in the water. The speakers up by the goblin camp are moving, along with the disco ball which is spinning around, and the clouds are moving across the sky. In response to a lot of comments that I got on my short about dead space around the scenery, you do make a good point that it helps keep the scenery from being cluttered and makes it look more natural. That's the way a lot of people probably view the scenery, and that's totally fine. I'm speaking for myself when I say that I like when there are a lot of things to look at in a scenery, and I like value. So when there's a lot more going on, it feels like I'm getting more value. Now, I definitely think there is a balance. I don't like when sceneries are too noisy and cluttered, but when executed correctly, I think there's room for variety and congruency. The jungle scenery is an example of the simplistic extreme, and I actually can't think of any scenery that goes to the other extreme of being too cluttered. I think Supercell has done a great job with all the sceneries. But anyway, the Books of Clash scenery just has a bit too much dead space for me. The bottom left is a good example of this. There's just an empty desert, a campfire, and an abandoned clearing. The rest of it is pretty much just trees. So that's the downside of this scenery for me. The one thing I like to do to get an overall feel of a scenery is the zoom test. So I'm going to put the entire scenery up on screen here, but zoomed out so that you can get a feel of how the entire thing looks. And this scenery does pass the test, not with flying colors, but it is acceptable. Some of my favorite details of this scenery are the bubbles in the lava, the hog head over here that moves up and down and the eyes start glowing, the clouds that are in the sky that give that parallax effect, and all the bananas hidden throughout the scenery. Now, as far as custom elements, this scenery does not have a custom forge, airship, or boat. I think it would have looked so much cooler if they had turned these elements into 2D elements to match the drawing style of the rest of the scenery. I think they really missed out on that opportunity. I don't know, maybe they'll update it in the future. The scenery has custom tiles and they're really simple, but obviously simple is what they're going for with this design. And I really like the little tufts of grass that they drew onto the tiles. I think that little detail looks really nice. The music on this scenery is S tier in my opinion. It sounds really triumphant, which makes sense for the village of Triumphica and the Triumphica Hog Riders from the Books of Clash, and I like how it's music the entire time instead of parts that are just village noises and then sections of music. I don't know if I would prefer that for every single scenery, but it's definitely nice for this one. And if you want to hear the full soundtrack uninterrupted, E12 Dragon always posts the latest scenery music on his channel, and that's where I go all the time when I just want to hear the music. This scenery also has the parallax effect. There's this crystal mountain over in the bottom right corner, along with the clouds which create that parallax effect on the bottom right and the top left, and also these balloons up here with the goblin and the skeleton. As promised, I have the link in the description so that you can check out the preview of the Books of Clash. My final ranking for this scenery is the A tier, and if you like this design, I think that it is definitely worth it to buy the scenery.